The steady rhythm of autumn rain drummed against the windows of Harrison Manor, the grand estate my family had called home for 3 generations. From my father's study, I watched thin streams of water slide across the old leaded glass while my 2 brothers sat only a few feet away, already dividing up an inheritance that hadn't even been officially settled. "The beach house on Martha's Vineyard should obviously be mine," James announced with complete confidence, smoothing back his perfectly styled hair. At 35, he had always believed being the oldest automatically entitled him to the biggest share of everything our family owned. William leaned back with a sarcastic laugh. "Seriously? You barely spend any time there." "My family practically lives there every summer." I stayed quiet, resting my fingertips on the worn leather armrest of my father's favorite chair. At 28, I was the youngest Harrison, and in my brothers' minds, the least qualified to carry on the family's legacy. I was the daughter who chose business over law or medicine, the one who left home instead of joining the company straight after college. They believed I had wandered through life searching for direction. If only they understood what had really happened. "Lizzie," James said with the familiar smile that always carried a hint of condescension. "You'd probably enjoy the little Vermont cottage. It's cozy. More your style." The Vermont property was the smallest asset our family owned, worth only a fraction of the main estate. I almost laughed, remembering a conversation Dad and I had shared in this very room 3 years earlier, when he had quietly revealed a plan that would change everything. Before anyone spoke again, Mrs. Collins, the assistant to our family's attorney, appeared in the doorway. "The video conference is ready," she said politely. I glanced at my watch. 2:55. Exactly when it was supposed to begin. A large display mounted on the study wall flickered to life, revealing Margaret Collins, our family's lawyer for the last 2 decades. Her silver hair was immaculate, and her expression carried the calm professionalism of someone who had handled difficult conversations countless times before. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began. "We're gathered today to discuss the administration of your father's estate following his passing last month." Dad's death had come peacefully. He had simply gone to sleep and never awakened. Only a week before, we had shared dinner together, and across the table he had given me a knowing wink, reminding me that the secret we carried would remain hidden until the right moment. "As you know," Margaret continued, "you've all reviewed the preliminary documents sent to you last week." James nodded immediately. "I have a few concerns regarding the percentages listed," he said. Margaret offered a small smile before interrupting. "Those papers were only procedural. Your father left detailed instructions about the order in which today's meeting should proceed." William frowned. "What exactly does that mean?" "The will itself is straightforward," he said. "Everything gets divided between the 3 of us. Only after we address one very important matter," Margaret replied as she organized the files in front of her. "We first need to discuss Harrison Global Enterprises." I straightened in my chair. The moment Dad and I had anticipated for years had finally arrived. James folded his arms. "What about the company?" "As the eldest, I assume I'll." "Harrison Global Enterprises," Margaret interrupted, "was sold 3 years ago." The room fell completely silent. Even the ticking grandfather clock outside the study suddenly seemed impossibly loud. William stared at the screen. "Sold? That's impossible." "Sold to who?" "Phoenix Capital Partners," Margaret answered, pausing just long enough for the words to settle. "More specifically, to its chief executive officer." James let out a short laugh, but panic crept into his voice. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Phoenix Capital? I've never even heard of them. Dad would never hand the company over to strangers." "You're right," I said calmly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. "He wouldn't." Both of my brothers turned toward me. Without rushing, I opened my bag and placed a thick folder on my father's polished mahogany desk. "Phoenix Capital Partners was founded 4 years ago," I explained. "It's a private investment firm focused on corporate restructuring and long-term growth." I paused just long enough for them to meet my eyes. "And I'm its CEO." Their reactions were almost frozen in place. James' face lost every trace of color. William simply stared, unable to form another sentence. "You," he whispered. "But, you were traveling. You said you were building your own company." "I was," I answered. "Phoenix Capital was that company. Dad became my first investor." James grabbed the folder with shaking hands, flipping through contracts, ownership transfers, board resolutions, and notarized agreements. Every page confirmed the same undeniable truth. "This can't be real," he muttered. "Dad would never do this." Margaret calmly stepped in. "Elizabeth spent 2 years earning your father's trust. She developed a complete strategy to modernize Harrison Global Enterprises and position it for long-term expansion. While the two of you competed over executive titles, she was learning every department of the business from the ground up." Those late nights with Dad flooded back into my memory. We had spent countless hours reviewing financial statements, debating strategy, and preparing for opportunities no one else even realized existed. My years away hadn't been an escape from responsibility. They had been preparation for it. Margaret continued. "All company assets, subsidiary businesses, investment portfolios, and corporate real estate were legally transferred to Phoenix Capital Partners in 2020. Your father remained chairman emeritus until his passing, while Elizabeth assumed operational leadership 3 years ago." William slowly lowered himself into a chair. "What about the estate?" he asked quietly. "The manor, the vacation homes, everything else?" I opened my laptop and displayed the ownership records. Harrison Manor, the Martha's Vineyard property, the European residences, and every major family asset belonged to Harrison Global Enterprises. James looked up with hollow eyes. "So, they all belong to you?" "To Phoenix Capital," I corrected. "Dad and I restructured everything years ago. It was the smartest way to protect the family's future." Outside, the rain had stopped, and soft sunlight began breaking through the clouds. Somewhere beyond the study, the house staff continued their daily routine, completely unaware that the foundation of my brother's world had just collapsed. William finally looked at me. "Why keep this from us?" I met his gaze without hesitation. "Would either of you have accepted taking orders from the younger sister you always dismissed as a disappointment?" James shoved his chair back so hard it scraped across the hardwood floor. "This isn't finished," he snapped. "We'll fight this." Margaret adjusted another document before speaking again. "Actually," she said, "now it's time to discuss your father's will, because it contains several conditions regarding both of your futures with the company." I leaned back in my chair, watching their confidence disappear as the next chapter of Dad's carefully planned legacy was about to unfold. The silence hanging over the study wasn't the end of my father's plan. It was only the opening move. Everything that had happened so far was designed to prepare them for what came next, and I realized, with an unexpected sense of calm, that Dad had orchestrated every detail years before this day ever arrived. I rested my hand against the worn leather of his chair, feeling as though he were still sitting beside me, quietly watching events unfold exactly as he'd intended. I looked toward the screen and gave Margaret a slight nod. "We're ready," I said. "Go ahead and explain the second phase." Margaret adjusted her glasses before fixing her attention on my brothers. "Your father created a unique succession plan regarding your future relationship with Harrison Global Enterprises," she began. "Although ownership has already been transferred, he believed both of you deserved one final opportunity to determine your own futures." James was still on his feet, unable to stay still. The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by restless frustration. "We don't need another arrangement," he snapped. "Everything here belongs to us." I calmly opened another document on my laptop. "That stopped being true 3 years ago." William leaned forward, confusion spreading across his face. "What are you talking about? You both signed the paperwork yourselves." His eyes narrowed. "No, we didn't." I rotated my laptop so they could clearly read the scanned pages. "Remember those quarterly corporate reports Dad insisted you review and sign every few months? The ones neither of you ever bothered to read? James frowned. So. Buried within each report was an updated shareholder agreement. Every signature authorized another portion of your voting rights and ownership interests to be transferred to Phoenix Capital. The final documents completed the process. For the first time, genuine realization crossed both their faces. Those reports had always been treated as another one of Dad's tedious traditions. They signed wherever he placed the tabs, eager to return to their own lives without asking a single question. James slammed a hand against the desk. That's fraud. Margaret answered before I had to. No, Mr. Harrison. Every clause was presented in plain language. Your signatures were witnessed, verified, and properly notarized. Choosing not to read legally binding documents doesn't invalidate them. Her words reminded me of countless evenings spent beside Dad as we prepared for exactly this possibility. Your brothers believe success comes from titles and appearances, he'd once told me. Real leadership begins with paying attention to every detail. Looking at them now, I realized he'd been right. Margaret lifted another folder from the stack beside her. Despite everything, your father never intended to leave either of you with nothing. He believed people can change, provided they're willing to earn the opportunity. She held up a sealed packet. This outlines the next stage of his succession plan. William finally found his voice. What exactly are the conditions? I rose from Dad's chair and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the estate. Outside, the gardeners carefully shaped the hedges with measured precision. Every movement required patience, discipline, and consistency. Those were qualities my father had spent years trying to teach all three of us, but only one of us had listened. Without turning around, I answered. If you want another chance, you'll start where everyone else starts. I faced them again. William, you'll report to our accounts receivable department. You'll process invoices, reconcile accounts, and learn how the business functions from the ground level. Then I looked at James. And you'll begin in compliance. Every policy, every regulation, every audit, you'll master the rules before you're ever trusted to make decisions again. James stared at me as though I'd spoken another language. Entry-level positions? You're serious? I've spent years building this company, I replied evenly. Nobody skips the process. I'm already a partner at Stevens and Mitchell. Margaret quietly corrected him. You were a partner. Both brothers looked toward the screen. Your father arranged for your employment agreements to conclude today. The necessary paperwork was completed months ago. Almost on cue, the grandfather clock echoed through the hallway with 4 deep chimes. At that exact moment, both of their phones vibrated. They checked their screens simultaneously. Their expressions said everything. Official notices confirmed that their positions had ended, effective immediately. William slowly lowered his phone. This can't be happening. It already has, I answered. But unlike everything else you've lost today, this is something you can still earn back. James folded his arms tightly. And if we refuse? I met his eyes without hesitation. Then your trust funds remain untouched until you're 65. Until then, you'll receive a monthly allowance that provides a comfortable life, but nothing extravagant. The color rising in James's face suggested he was mentally calculating mortgage payments, luxury cars, and the yacht he'd recently purchased, assuming his inheritance would cover every expense. Margaret wasn't finished. Your father also prepared personal letters for each of you. I opened the center drawer of Dad's desk and removed 2 envelopes sealed with the Harrison family crest. Neither brother spoke as they accepted them. The room remained completely still except for the faint rustling of paper. I watched their expressions transform as they read. I'd experienced that same moment after Dad passed away. My own letter hadn't contained instructions or financial advice. Instead, it held something far more valuable, his confidence in me, his gratitude for the years we'd worked together, and a quiet reminder that leadership meant making difficult choices without losing compassion. William lowered his letter first. His shoulders sagged. He knew he whispered. He knew about the insider trading. I nodded. He knew everything. James looked up sharply. And the money missing from William's bank? We have complete records. His voice hardened. So this is blackmail? No. I kept my tone calm. It's accountability. I stepped closer. You can choose to rebuild your lives. Work honestly. Learn the business properly. Earn people's trust instead of assuming it belongs to you. I paused. If you do that, those investigations never become public. And if we don't? James asked. I shrugged slightly. Phoenix Capital has a legal obligation to report evidence of financial misconduct. We'd simply fulfill that responsibility. The study became so quiet that the distant sounds of hedge trimmers outside seemed unusually loud. Dad's words echoed in my memory as clearly as if he'd spoken them moments earlier. Real power isn't measured by how hard you strike. It's measured by knowing exactly when restraint serves you better. William finally broke the silence. How long have you been planning this? I returned to Dad's chair and settled into it once more. Do you remember when I left 6 years ago? Neither of them answered. You thought I was walking away from responsibility. In reality, I was preparing for it. Business school, investment firms, international partnerships, years spent building Phoenix Capital one decision at a time. James slowly lowered his head. While you relied on the Harrison name to open every door, I finished. I was learning how to build doors of my own. Margaret placed 2 employment contracts on the table before the camera. You have 24 hours to review these agreements, she said. After that deadline passes, the appropriate regulatory agencies will receive documentation they've never seen before. William swallowed. And if we accept? If we actually prove ourselves over the next 2 years? I opened one final file and slid it across the desk. Then my father's promise becomes yours. Complete the program, earn the trust you've lost, and each of you will receive a 20% ownership stake in the company. Neither of them spoke. For the first time in their lives, they understood that the future waiting before them wouldn't be inherited. It would have to be earned. I let those words settle over the room before speaking again. I'll continue to hold the controlling interest, I said evenly, but if you earn your place, you'll receive genuine authority inside this company. Not symbolic titles. Not empty privileges. Real responsibility that comes with real accountability. Neither of them answered immediately. James finally looked up, his voice stripped of the arrogance it usually carried. Why? It was almost a whisper. Why go through all of this? I met his eyes for a long moment. Because Dad cared about something much bigger than money. I slowly closed the folder in front of me. He believed a family's legacy isn't measured by estates, stock portfolios, or expensive properties. It's measured by character, judgment, and the choices people make when no one is watching. He wanted every Harrison to deserve the family name instead of simply inheriting it. The room remained silent. I gathered my laptop and organized the remaining papers into my briefcase. You have 24 hours, I reminded them. Margaret has the contracts. This time, I'd strongly recommend reading every page before you sign. Without waiting for another argument, I turned and headed toward the study door. Just before I reached it, William called after me. Where are you going? I glanced back over my shoulder. To work. A faint smile crossed my face. Unlike some people, I still have a company to run. I paused one last time. And James, you might want to contact the yacht broker. I have a feeling you'll appreciate the cash a lot more than the boat. Neither of them responded. The security cameras mounted discreetly around the study silently captured every expression as I walked away. Dad had insisted years earlier that every major family meeting be recorded. At the time it had seemed excessive. Now it felt almost poetic. Outside, the storm had completely passed. Sunlight reflected off the rain-soaked gardens, turning every hedge and flower bed into shimmering patches of green. The air smelled fresh, almost as though the estate itself had been waiting for this moment. I unlocked my phone and called the office. My assistant answered before the first ring had finished. "Good afternoon, Miss Harrison." "Everything's finished," I replied. "Did it go the way Mr. Harrison expected?" I smiled. "Almost exactly." There was a brief pause. "I'll notify Human Resources." "Yes." I continued walking toward my car. "Have the orientation team prepared first thing tomorrow morning. I have a feeling we'll be welcoming 2 new entry-level employees. And if they decide not to come?" I thought briefly about the remaining documents locked inside Dad's private safe, papers my brothers didn't even know existed. "They'll come." I slipped into the driver's seat. "If they don't, the final stage of Dad's plan will make the decision for them." As I ended the call, I couldn't help thinking how carefully every piece had been arranged years before. Dad had always said the strongest move in any negotiation was the one nobody realized had been made until every escape route had already disappeared. The next morning, Harrison Global Enterprises was buzzing long before business hours officially began. News traveled quickly inside a company. By 8 o'clock, nearly everyone had heard the same unbelievable rumor. The Harrison brothers were reporting for entry-level jobs. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of my executive office overlooking Boston's financial district, I watched 2 familiar vehicles enter the underground parking garage. James arrived first in his black Maserati. William followed a few moments later. They'd made their choice. I pressed the intercom. "They're here." My assistant's voice answered immediately. "Human Resources is standing by. Send them to my office before orientation begins." A few minutes later, the doors opened. For the first time in years, my brothers entered a corporate office looking uncertain. Their expensive custom suits had been replaced with standard business casual clothing. James looked as though he hadn't slept. William avoided looking directly at me. The confidence that once filled every room they entered had been replaced with cautious humility. I motioned toward the chairs across from my desk. "Have a seat." Behind me, sunlight poured through the glass wall, illuminating the skyline stretching across downtown Boston. It was the same view Dad had admired when he approved the purchase of this headquarters years earlier. Neither brother spoke. Before orientation started, there was one final piece of Dad's plan they needed to see. I reached beneath my desk and pressed a concealed button. A section of the wall slid quietly aside, revealing a reinforced safe hidden behind polished wood paneling. William's eyes widened. "I've seen that before." "You've seen one like it," I corrected. "The original is still inside Dad's study. This is an identical safe. Its contents were transferred here after the funeral." Inside rested only 2 items. A sealed envelope. And a single USB drive. I connected the drive to my laptop. Seconds later, the large display on the wall came to life. Dad appeared on the screen. He looked exactly as I remembered him only days before he passed, calm, composed, and carrying the quiet confidence that had guided our family for decades. "My children," he began warmly. "If you're watching this recording, then everything has unfolded exactly as Elizabeth and I hoped." James shifted uneasily. William leaned closer without realizing it. Dad continued. "Elizabeth has earned every responsibility I've entrusted to her. But choosing a successor was never my only objective." He folded his hands on the desk. "My greatest concern was saving this family before it destroyed itself." The camera shifted, revealing folders spread neatly across his desk. "I know about all of it." Neither brother moved. "The insider trading." William's breathing slowed. "The financial misconduct." James stared at the floor. "And every attempt either of you made to undermine your sister whenever she proposed changes that threatened your comfort." The color drained from both their faces. It became painfully obvious there were details even I hadn't known. Dad sighed gently. But I also remember two little boys who weren't always like this. His expression softened. William, I remember you insisting we hold a funeral for your pet fish because you believed every life mattered. A faint smile crossed his face. James, I remember discovering you'd secretly donated your allowance to someone living on the streets because you couldn't bear seeing them hungry. For the first time that morning, neither of them looked angry. They looked ashamed. That's why I supported Elizabeth's proposal. William turned toward me. Your proposal? I nodded quietly. The final phase started as my idea. Dad refined it, but the foundation came from me. On the screen, Dad lifted another document. This is the inheritance that truly matters. He smiled sadly. Elizabeth isn't simply responsible for protecting the company. He looked directly into the camera. She's responsible for protecting both of you until you're ready to protect yourselves. His words settled heavily over the office. Real wealth isn't stored in bank accounts or hidden inside property deeds. It's found in trust, integrity, and the legacy we leave behind after we're gone. James discreetly wiped moisture from the corner of his eye. William kept staring silently at his hands. And one final condition, Dad said with a small smile. Elizabeth may change your responsibilities, promote you, or even dismiss you if necessary. I opened the envelope from the safe and spread its contents across my desk. But there is one instruction neither of us has the authority to alter. Both brothers looked up. Every Sunday, I said quietly, the entire family has dinner together. Dad's recorded voice continued. No business. No arguments about money. No negotiations. He smiled one last time. Because before you become partners again, you have to remember how to become a family. The screen slowly faded to black, leaving only the quiet hum of the office around us. After a long silence, I reached for one final folder. There's one adjustment Dad asked me to reveal only after you'd both chosen to show up. They looked at me. If you spend 1 full year, not 2, working honestly, learning the business, and proving you've changed, each of you will receive 15% of the company's shares. I slid another document toward them. And an additional 10% will be placed into trusts for your future children. William blinked. Our children. Dad always planned further ahead than the rest of us, I answered. Neither brother spoke. James slowly walked toward the windows overlooking the city, his reflection staring back at him against the bright morning skyline, as though he were seeing himself clearly for the very first time. The silence lingered for several seconds before James finally turned away from the window. So none of this, he said quietly, was ever about getting even with us? I shook my head. Never. I let the answer settle before continuing. It was about giving you a chance to become the people Dad always believed you could be. This wasn't revenge. It was rescue, for both of you, and for this family. William stepped beside his brother, his expression filled with regret. We treated you terribly, he admitted. For years we underestimated you, dismissed you, and acted like you never belonged. You did, I answered honestly. But you're still my brothers. Dad never stopped believing you were capable of changing. James looked directly at me. And what about you? His voice was steadier now. Do you believe it? I walked over to join them, and together we looked out across the city. Morning traffic filled the streets below as thousands of people hurried toward offices, meetings, and opportunities they hoped would shape their futures. I believe this company deserves all of us at our best, I replied. James, your legal knowledge can protect this business instead of serving personal ambition. William, your financial instincts can help build something lasting when they're guided by integrity instead of shortcuts. I smiled faintly. But before we rebuild a company, we have to rebuild trust. I glanced between them. And that starts with Sunday dinner. William raised an eyebrow. Back at the manor? I laughed softly. No. At my apartment. Both of them looked surprised. I make a pretty good lasagna. Besides, I still have my Harvard graduation photos that neither of you bothered to attend. And Dad left me an entire collection of embarrassing childhood pictures that I've been saving for the perfect occasion. For the first time in what felt like years, James laughed without arrogance or sarcasm. So you're planning to use those against us forever? I grinned. Absolutely. Being a Harrison comes with certain responsibilities. The months that followed tested all three of us. James struggled with reporting to managers younger than himself, learning that respect couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned. William found himself relearning processes he'd once ignored while climbing the corporate ladder too quickly. Neither journey was easy. But little by little, something unexpected happened. Sunday dinners became more important than board meetings. Stories replaced arguments. Laughter slowly took the place of resentment. Instead of competing for our father's approval, we began sharing memories of him, discovering that we had missed far more than business opportunities during those divided years. 6 months later, I invited both of them back to my office. They walked in looking noticeably different from the nervous men who had arrived on their first day. There was confidence in their posture now, but it was quieter, grounded by humility rather than entitlement. The board has noticed your progress, I told them. Especially your commitment to doing things the right way. William smiled. I know it's too early for the share transfer. It is, I agreed. This meeting is about something else. James sighed dramatically. Please don't tell me there's another phase. I couldn't help laughing. No. This one belongs to me. Their curiosity replaced their concern. I've been considering launching a new venture alongside Harrison Global. A separate company that complements what we've already built. I paused. And I'd like the two of you to build it with me, as equal partners. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then the conversation exploded into ideas, questions, disagreements, and possibilities. We spent hours around that conference table debating markets, strategies, and business models. This time, though, the arguments weren't fueled by ego. They were driven by genuine collaboration. Exactly 1 year after that unforgettable inheritance meeting, the three of us returned to Dad's study. Everything looked almost unchanged. The old leather chair. The polished desk. Even the security cameras remained quietly mounted in their familiar corners, silent witnesses to everything our family had survived. I want to show you something, I said. I pulled up the recording from the day our father's plan had finally been revealed. We watched ourselves in silence. The angry brothers convinced the world owed them everything. The younger sister carrying a burden no one else understood. When the video ended, William let out a slow breath. I barely recognized those people. James smiled. I recognize them. He looked at us both. I'm just glad they aren't us anymore. I laughed as William lightly shoved him in the shoulder. Looking at my brothers now, I realized how much had changed. James no longer hid behind pride. William had rediscovered the kindness that had defined him long before success clouded his judgment. And somewhere along the way, I'd gained something I never expected. Not employees. Not business partners. Brothers I could trust again. I looked around Dad's study one final time. He'd be proud of us, I said quietly. Not because we'd protected the company. Not because we'd preserved the fortune. But because we'd finally become the family he'd spent his entire life trying to build. In the end, the greatest inheritance Dad left behind was never the business, the estate, or the wealth. It was the chance to rediscover one another. That was the legacy that truly mattered, and it was worth more than everything else combined.